I'm a content marketer. I've worked in B2B and B2C, a lot of different brands, and I just got off about a 9-year stint at Square where I built their content program and their organic growth team. Data storytelling was really pivotal to the strategy there. It's one of my favorite tactics. It's incredibly useful for a number of reasons. It helps drive home brand and product messaging. It's fantastic fuel for every type of marketing you do, and actually really your go-to-market strategy. And it's great for organic growth. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. I'm gonna spend a short amount of time kind of convincing you why it's really important, and then we're gonna get into how you actually do it, how you identify stories, how you build a program, and then kind of what you can do next. How many of you measure the impact of your content programs through organic search? Like that's the way that you do it. Because it's a lot of companies that I talk to. And I said this yesterday, like throw out that playbook. It's not just because of AI, and I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. It's because content marketing, the value of it is that you provide value to your customer, and value can be defined in a number of ways. And at some point, they're gonna provide value back to you. We kind of touched on this earlier today. If you're only thinking about content in terms of organic search, you aren't providing full value to your customer, because one of the ways you provide value is showing up where they exist, where they look for information, where they look for entertainment, where they look for education. So this shifting of the playbook is not just about AI. That's what people internally care about, right? That's what like your higher ups want to know about. Your content strategy shifting is about the shift in consumer behavior that has been happening for about 5 years. So this isn't even a new thing. Like a lot of brands have been thinking about this for a long time. We've gone through a lot of this. Like the funnel isn't linear. People are looking at things all over the place. They're using a lot of different platforms. It's not an either or. You know, people aren't just looking at search or going to ChatGPT. They're doing both. And search is still incredibly important, so you don't want to forget about it. And then like social platforms, they're a place that people search for information too. They search for entertainment, particularly younger generations, you know, like TikTok is a search engine. So this is something that the CEO of HubSpot said at their inbound conference last month. Consumers are swiping, scrolling, and switching apps every few seconds. Buyers used to start with your content on their website. Now they're everywhere but your website. AI overviews and provide the answers at the top of every search. That's a big shift, and it's gonna accelerate from here. I just love this because it gives you a feeling of like, and this, I don't know, this resonates with me. I don't just go to a search engine and then make a decision. It's not a linear path. I'm all over the place looking at things when I wanna make a decision about a product or just find information. And I think the interesting thing about HubSpot is that they started shifting their content strategy about 5 years ago, because something really big happened for all of us in the world about 5 years ago. COVID just completely changed how we operated and the kind of media we consumed and how we behaved with online and all of that. And so you saw this a few years ago. Instead of really thinking about the information they're delivering through content, they thought about where they were showing up, where their customers were consuming content. That's why they started investing in podcasts and YouTube, and they bought The Hustle and all of that. We did the same thing at Square. When the pandemic hit, we knew, you know, people weren't searching necessarily for how to start a business at that moment in time. They actually needed something really different from us because we couldn't provide all the information for them. Things were happening really rapidly. Legislation was changing, restrictions were happening. We didn't have all that information. We didn't even know how to, kind of the best strategies that were working at any given point in time. But our customers did, right? So we shifted our content strategy to focus much more on what they were saying and thinking and feeling. We started doing podcasts, more video series, thinking much more multimedia, and really expanded from content living in organic and owned channels to being fully paid, owned, earned. So here's the big takeaway. Shift your content strategy from sharing information with your customers to influencing them. And that doesn't just have to do with what you're putting in your content, but where it's showing up. I would say also the other part of this is it means you have to stop thinking about content as asset, and content becomes the way you systematically share a message across a multi-channel journey. That's a really big mindset shift for a lot of organizations. To do that, you really need to know your audience really, really, really well. What do they care about? What problems do they have? Where do they spend their time? Who influences them? And then what do they want from you? Like, where do you have permission to speak to them about things? What are they going to care about you, your brand, saying? Of course, your primary audience is human. You still do have a secondary audience. That's the machine. Like, we don't want to forget about it, but it's not the machine in a silo. It's the machine is servicing the human audience too, right? They're making sure the content shows up where your human audience is going to see it. So you have to think about both. The good news is that both humans and machines crave unique, high quality, authoritative content. And in this day and age, that means thought leadership. There's a lot of different kinds of thought leadership. It's kind of, for a very long time, a very overused, opaque word. One of the kinds of thought leadership that I think is just a no-brainer, it's kind of a cheat code for organic growth, is insights and trends programs, data storytelling. That's why you see so many brands investing in it. Brands having whole teams hiring economists. Like, all of this really supports that motion. Because consistent data storytelling positions brands as authorities. And that's what you want to establish. You want to establish yourself as authority in a specific space. This is Travis Gonzalez, works at Informa Tech Target. I worked with him for years on content strategy at Square. And I love this. He said, if you're not just reacting to a given trend, but the one setting it, people learn to depend on your perspective to get ahead. And that is the real goal of this kind of thought leadership. It's what's going to make you stand out in an environment where AI is creating really a sea of content, a sea of sameness in content. Has any of your brands tried data storytelling? Maybe like a little bit? Anyone have a big program? No? Okay, great. Okay, so here's how I identify stories worth telling, because not all stories are worth telling. Very few are, actually. The first thing is you have to have a documented content strategy. I'm not going to walk through how you do that, because there's a lot of things that go into a documented content strategy. But one of the most critical I've found is what we would call at Square ownable conversations. I'm going to give a hat tip to Travis on this one, too. He and I worked on these for years. In maybe that more traditional playbook, this might be called a content pillar. Content pillars, though, usually are like you have a topic, you have a bunch of keywords that ladder up to it, and you create content. Ownable conversations are different because a conversation is two-way. It means that you're engaging with a group of people in a community in a certain way. Really, you have to find your value proposition first, so like what your brand brings to the industry, to this community. Then look at the content zeitgeist, like what is happening in the world, what conversations are already existing. And where those two things overlap, that's where your ownable conversation is. It's also where citation-worthy content happens. So an example for Square. Square actually just came out with some very new brand positioning about see you in the neighborhood. So this idea of like localness, neighborhood businesses. Now, I've not been with Square for a few months, but one of the ownable conversations we were working around was the idea of the third place. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but the third place, there's the first place, which is your home, your second place, which is school, work, and then historically, there's a third place where your community meets. Sometimes that's church, sometimes that's a library. We were kind of going around this idea that more and more a third place may be a local business, and what does that mean? And there's so many kinds of stories that can evolve from that. That actually aren't even just high-level awareness stories. You can actually bring that down into the product and how you shape product to be supportive of this kind of community business. So ownable conversations, very important, I think, to develop so you have guardrails on what kind of data storytelling you actually want to do. And then you can start using this kind of three-step framework to build your stories. First step is gather. So you want to get into the mindset of your consumer. That means looking at a lot of data, mass, niche, owned, from competitors. You want to read the media they're reading. You want to watch the media they're watching. And you want to understand what they care about. Like, what are they going to care about that you can say? The second is determine. You have to validate it. Is this actually a thing? And can the brand that I work for shape it or own it outright? Or are we just adding to noise? And then third is implement. You package the insights in a way that's really engaging for your audience. I'll go into these a little bit with examples. So gather, first finding the trends and insight. You want to look in both qualitative and quantitative data for this. In some cases, just talking to your customers on a regular basis is going to bring these trends out. So This image here is a project I worked on at Square years ago called Making Change. Probably most people won't remember this, but in 2019, there was a big wave of stories in the media about economies all over the world going cashless, which if you work for a payments company, you pay a lot of attention to. It was interesting for us, not only because it's quite a provocative kind of thought, but because what we were hearing from customers was the exact opposite, like how important cash is. So when you hear those two things that conflict, there's some tension there, you get a little curious and say, we got to dig into the data here and see what we can find. And that's what we did. We dug into kind of payments and transaction data across Square and Cash App, looked at what was actually happening to kind of get a sense of the state of cash in the United States. Then we brought in Harvard professors, council members in different cities, business owners, our actual customers, to talk about this and kind of give light to the humanness behind the numbers we were viewing. We built it into this really amazing interactive website. It's still live if you want to go look for it. And it got a huge amount of pickup in the press. It was cited in Congress. And we did it for a few years because what happened is once we put it out, reporters in the media kept coming to us to update the data and understand what it looked like now, what it looked like in specific cities, states. So it was a really effective program. Okay, step 2, determining. This is a super critical step. Do we have permission and the expertise to own the conversation we've identified in this trend? It's not always the case that you do. Maybe sometimes you have to wait a little bit of time to get in on it. Can we be the first or the best source? And third, you need to understand if it's a micro trend or something a bit more macro. So this is another piece that my team worked on. When I first got to Square, we kept, you're always searching for customers to put in things like case studies. We kept finding these really funny businesses that we coined this idea of a multi-hyphenate, which is a business with really disparate parts. So think like coffee shop, laundromat. The coffee shop can be attached to almost anything, and you get a lot of these kinds of businesses. So we saw a couple, we're like, oh, that's kind of fun, and then the next year we saw a few more, and we're like, and there was an article in New York Magazine about it, and we're like, okay, this is something we're seeing, we should write some content about this. Great, we did it, we identified that it was like a thing that was growing. 2020 hits, and this trend actually explodes because businesses, because of all the restrictions in place, needed to add revenue streams to their business in order to stay afloat. So what you have is multi-hyphenate businesses popping up everywhere. It actually becomes, and Square is actually very well positioned to support that kind of business because it works a bit more horizontally than vertically. And so it becomes part of our product messaging, and we say, hey, we actually already have content that really supports this. 1, we're gonna update it. 2, we're gonna actually kind of go a step further and do some data work and surveying around this. So again, validated it early on, then kind of revalidated it a couple of years later. That is definitely a macro trend. A micro trend, the thing you want to ask yourself there, if you're going to get in on it, usually you're joining a micro trend, you're not leading a micro trend, and you just want to know if it's going to have an outsized impact for that short amount of time and if it's really worth your time to spend on it. This picture, you're probably wondering, is from Square's TikTok. Last year, maybe the year before, there was a really big craze around this viral cucumber salad. And at the time, I had basically told the team working on TikTok, just be unhinged, try everything and see what works. And they decided to do this whole kind of take on the cucumber salad when someone's buying all the ingredients. 450,000 views for probably an hour's worth of work. So that's an example of joining in. It did great things for how the algorithm viewed us within TikTok. Okay, and then step 3 is implement. I think it's just really important to remember to build for humans. So strategic narratives, visual storytelling, emotional resonance, really bringing out human voices, especially when you have that data, right? You just don't want the data on the page. You want to bring examples of how that data looks in real life using your customers or subject matter experts, and then optimize for machines, what that looks like. The LLMs, for instance, just look for really good content strategy. The authority signals, original research, proprietary data, consistency in your thought leadership, structured information, multi-format content. I mean, this is what your customers are looking for too, right? They don't want just a gated report. They want to see these things show up in their Instagram feed and on YouTube and maybe in a podcast. And then citation-worthy content also. And I'll dig a little bit more into that. What makes something citation-worthy? Specific, surprising statistics, actionable takeaways, consistent voice and authority, clear declarations of your trends, and backed by data and transparent methodology. I was a reporter. These are actually the same things that if you were to send a report to a reporter, these are the things they are going to look for too, right? It's not just machines. Like, people evaluate this content in a very similar way, which is why a program like this actually works across multiple channels. It supports your human audience and still is optimized for your machines. And then if anyone works globally across multiple markets, I would say Square did. One of the examples I can kind of bring to life around this is our longest data program, which is called the Future of Commerce. Another one we started post-COVID, 2021. It was our kind of forward-looking trends report because so many business owners felt on the back foot during COVID, and this was our attempt to give them information they could action on and feel ahead of the game. We did that in the US first, and then ultimately we made this a fully global program. And the way that we did that is that we worked with people in each market to validate the assumptions that we had, and then tailor the content to cultural nuances, needs, economics. And then I would say this is a great place to bring in AI to help version. The other thing about this is you need to create content for the channels. The content you create should not dictate the channels, it's the other way around. And so when you're working with your local marketing teams, understanding where they're playing channel-wise can help you kind of shape what that content actually looks like. Okay, so that's how you identify the stories. And then you have to actually, kind of put the whole program together. One of the things that I hear really consistently from marketing teams is that they're being asked to scale content. Oh, thank you so much. The problem with scaling content is what that usually means is increasing quantity. And when you're doing that, you're just increasing output. What you actually want to do is scale a program, which is how you scale outcomes. You increase outcomes, and that's what you want to look at. Outcomes, not outputs. So this is how you start. You establish a rhythm, you have to identify the research initiative, a cadence for that, for pulling the data, for creating the content, and how you're going to distribute it, really most importantly. And in order to do that, you have to establish kind of an operational structure. This is the most difficult part, honestly. Finding the stories is not as tough as getting all your go-to-market teams on board to kind of help create this, because it's usually not a single content person sitting in a room doing this. You have to have people help pull the data. You usually have to have people distribute the content. You have creative teams and your web teams and all of that. When it comes to data too, most companies are sitting on stores and stores of data. They just don't necessarily know how to access it or what maybe all that does exist. And this is why when you're doing content strategy, when you're thinking about the kinds of stories you want to tell, you actually don't want to sit in a room by yourself to do that either. You want to talk with people across the entire company to understand what might exist. Some of our best ideas for our data stories, it came from sitting with a product analyst who was in the data all the time and said, hey, I saw this thing. I don't know if it means anything to anyone or if reporters would care about that, but here it is. And so you want to go and you kind of reach out across the org to find these things. You can also commission or work with a partner who has data potentially. That's a great way to open a partnership. And then you need to understand how to tell the story. I think this is another part that maybe scares marketing teams in particular a little bit, because they look at this and they're like, okay, I'd love to do an annual report, a quarterly report, a monthly thing, and some regular insights. But I don't have the resources. And so resources, I think, often get in the way of the strategy piece of this. I think, when you're starting out, you may want to pilot something, and something like a monthly poll is quite easy to do a pilot program with and validate. But if you're going to invest long term, it may not make sense, but actually the comprehensive annual report, which is going to be your highest lift, is actually the most efficient over the long run, because this one report can actually create the content for all of the rest of it. And the great part about that is if you'd use that kind of approach, like we do with the Future of Commerce at Square, we had one set of comprehensive reports. We'd do kind of quarterly updates that we'd distribute through webinars, kind of monthly pieces of content on our content hub, and then maybe weekly social proof points through email or LinkedIn. But if you use the one report to do that, you actually have that consistent messaging across all of your channels, and it's really, really supportive of your kind of brand and pipeline metrics. And then distribution. I think this is part, just generally with content, is the most undervalued part and maybe the least thought about, because content has been so synonymous with organic search. People create content and they're like, it's great, it's gonna rank for organic search and that's how we're gonna get traffic. Like we said, people are everywhere. You have to think about all the places they're going to exist. So you need to show up wherever they are, and you need to work with your go-to-market teams to make sure you're doing that. You need to look at owned and organic, of course, but also paid and earned. So your comms team should probably be in, if your content team doesn't sit on comms, they should be in and helping shaping the narrative for any kind of data storytelling you're doing, because they're gonna pitch it out to publications, and that's gonna be a great driver, actually, of your organic growth and visibility. I also think like the other part is like partnerships and influencers. I wouldn't just think about them even as distribution mechanisms. Have them help you create the content. So on Future of Commerce, we work really closely with a restaurant technology expert. She has a small but very devoted following, and she actually helped us create part of the report. She gave analysis from some of the data we had, so she was included in it, and then she distributed it through her own newsletter, and she did webinar programs, and it was a really great way to reach the right audience. And then consider launching across all your channels simultaneously as opposed to a rollout, because your LLMs are looking at all those channels all the time. You want to be everywhere all at once. Of course, you also have to update KPIs if you're working this way. So think about the goals are probably you're going to have around something like this are probably related to lead or pipeline, but you want to think about citations and mentions, share of voice, qualified traffic. So not just traffic, but traffic that's actually qualified for your product. Content recycle, this is one that very few people look at, but like how often is the content you're creating being used across channels? I think content engagement becomes really important here again in a way that's been overlooked for some time. Do people actually like it? And it's kind of related to sentiment. Is it doing the thing content needs to do? Is changing people's hearts and minds the way you want it to? And then make sure the experience where this storytelling live is optimized. So ideally, you probably have a place on your content hub where the story lives, even though you're gonna put this all over your other channels as well. And you wanna make sure that on the back end it's actually optimized appropriately. Most companies' blogs aren't necessarily optimized for like full multimedia and like really interactive storytelling. So if you invest fully, that might be something that you wanna look at, is updating your content hub. Okay, and how you start to do this. These are kind of my just principles for a really successful program. So if you're thinking about doing this, these are the pieces I'd go back to. Is you want to be the source, not the synthesizer. You want to do something original that like only you can do. So people, again, know to come to you for that topic. Consistency, way more important than perfection. Like you rather get things happening regularly than have that report be absolutely perfect. You can improve and optimize over time. You want to build channel agnostic stories. So the story should be able to live across all channels. The distribution plan should inform the asset production. So a lot of teams start with like story and format. Like format's really the last thing you should be thinking about because it should be dictated by all the other pieces. And then make your insights human. Use human voices who also maybe have a unique citable perspective. Again, the biggest hurdle for this is usually kind of internal logistics. So align your team internally around the do's and don'ts. Like this isn't going to happen overnight. You don't want to build authority overnight. So you have to invest in this kind of thing over a longer period of time. And you have to prioritize that with executives and get buy-in on the timelines. And really commitment from cross-functional partners, because it won't work as well if it's just one team pushing it out. And then I would always recommend build a pilot program. Audit your current content, identify those unique data sources, build a pilot report. It doesn't have to be big, it could be a page. Test distribution, paid, owned, earned. Don't forget about your sales team. They are great at getting qualitative data back on this kind of stuff, so you can tweak it and make it better. And then, build from there for what works. And I would just say the brands establishing this kind of authority today will be the ones who are cited tomorrow. So get going. If you need help, let me know.
Thanks, that was a great presentation.
Yeah.
You mentioned the restaurant technology influencer.
Yes.
And how that helped you guys a lot. Was that a paid engagement? How do you engage with someone like that and make it work?
It depends, and it's shifted over time. There was a moment in time where we'd reach out to an expert like that, and we would work with them. There would be no exchange of payment, more in kind. Like, we have a really large audience you want access to. Same, we just trade those things. Increasingly, because of the whole influencer economy, that's not the case. So with someone like that, there was paid involvement, not involvement in the report. There's paid involvement for, we sponsored her newsletter at one point. And so we kind of built a relationship on some of those things, and then she would actually ask to be part of other pieces of it.
I know this wasn't part of the presentation, but I was curious if you had any thoughts around connecting brand and content to demand generation and leads, and just how to make that connection.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I find that most marketing teams either put the content team in brand, or they put it in performance. And in my mind, it's any great content program is completely full funnel, for lack of a better way of describing it, and multi-channel. So with something like the future of commerce, obviously that hits some very kind of high-level brand goals. But actually, in the last year, we shifted kind of priorities over time based on the business strategy. And this last year, the goals around that were actually based on leads. So while it hit some of the kind of things we wanted to do, and from a sentiment perspective, what we're actually doing was creating journeys and pathways that would capture demand and then nurture people through to the sales team. So again, I didn't get into this here, but creating those journeys. So even if they're entering at one point of the funnel and they're just aware and maybe they don't have a lot of intent, you can move them through with different pieces of content you create from this.
And maybe a follow-up is, we talk a lot about email as a way to reach people, and people are inundated with email. So I was curious if you had any other thoughts around how to reach people.
Yeah, I do, a lot. I mean, I think email is still important, but I think we used email a lot as not even gates necessarily. Sometimes we just add an email capture to a page and say, hey, you want to get more from us? Here's how, or we're going to update this series next month. Do you want to be notified when that happens? I think inviting people to opt in is really important. There are some other, influencers, like I said, I think have been used in one way, which is, you give them a message, they distribute it on their channels. I think thinking about how you use influencers on your channels and how they can distribute through theirs creates a whole different dynamic that creates a lot more authority for you and actually brings more of a qualified audience in. I think there's also some really interesting new partners out there. One that I love, I'm going to give a shout out to, is called Stacker. It is basically they will take a story, like the future of commerce. Maybe we have an article about what people are doing with order ahead, and they will push that out to publications across the country, because local papers, for instance, need content all the time. They don't have enough staff. It's a 24-hour news cycle. So they're actually taking content. We aren't paying to be put there, but they're publishing, a brand's content for free. And you're getting eyeballs in different local markets. So you can start to really cater, particularly data work, even at the local level, to that using some AI tools. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there. And it's just being really thoughtful and focused with what your audience might be into.
Awesome presentation, Mallory. Thank you. One of the things that I took out as a soundbite was the idea of don't think about sharing content as information, share content as influence for your customers. Yeah. And the TikTok example was awesome. And there's a lot of interesting channels, video channels, and also other social channels. If you were to stack rank, for an emerging fast growth B2B company, which I think a lot of people here are, what would be your short go-to list for kind of transforming your content strategy quickly? Are there certain channels you would just say, don't miss that one, go see what you can get from TikTok or Snapchat? Or, I mean, we all know Facebook is more and more B2B. I think that came up in Neil Patel's conversation or somebody else. Just curious if you have any go-tos, just little tips for us.
I mean, some of this is shaped by the fact that like Square is I was doing B2B marketing at Square, but because we're talking with small businesses, it's actually kind of a more B2C mindset. And so I kind of think any channel's on the table, whether you're doing B2B or B2C. With that said, I think LinkedIn is very interesting right now. Just the way the algorithm works compared to other networks, and the way that like the individual people have voices on there. It's not really brands. I think there's something really interesting to play there with. So for B2B brands, I would definitely go look at that. Depending on the kind of audience you have with B2B and who you're serving, like TikTok is a really great way to get a lot of visibility, but it's not going to be for every brand because your audience might not fully be there. I still think email's really important, but you need to think about email in a very different way than anyone else. Like, think about putting the content there. If you think about how important something like Substack is right now, like people are going crazy over it. I mean, that's another channel you could think about if you don't want to build something on your own site, but being served that content in the email form as versus it being more transactional, I think is something I had been looking at Square for quite a lot of time. But then you don't want to neglect some of the kind of tried and true. Like, you do want a content hub on your website as a source of truth that you can kind of drive people into, and create maybe more foundational pieces of content that can be broken up and repackaged for other channels.